Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's nationalist rhetoric and embrace of culture wars has long since soured his standing among other leaders in Europe. But what isolates him among his European colleagues has endeared him to the American right.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Texas.
Republicans are doubling down on their love affair with Viktor Orban. Over the last 12 years, Orban successfully transformed Hungary's democracy into an autocracy. Experts in autocratic governments warn that Orban is giving Republicans a blueprint to replicate. Shepley describes Orban as a legalistic autocrat, someone who dismantles the law to achieve their constitutional aims.
When you see that Orban wins these overwhelming election majorities, it turns out that actually only about a third of that is enthusiastic support for him. And the rest of it are various smoke and mirror tricks that he's put in place. Pliant parliaments, gerrymandering, and packed courts. Pliant parliaments, gerrymandering, and packed courts. Pliant parliaments, gerrymandering, and packed courts was a big piece of why Orban was able to rig the rules and win every election since. And now we see those tactics coming here.
In a recent xenophobic speech, Orban likened migrants to a flood being forced upon Hungary and decried a mixed-race society. Still, Orban was welcomed with open arms by Republican leaders. As seen here in video produced by his staff, Orban trekked to Bedminster, New Jersey, where he met face-to-face with former President Donald Trump.
We love Hungary.
And in Dallas, Texas, at the Conservative Political Action Conference known as CPAC, Orban received keynote treatment.
Now the West is at war with itself.
He painted Hungary and white Christian Americans as allies in the struggle against a progressive global order.
I am here to tell you that our values, the nation, Christian roots, and family, can be successful in the political battlefield. We made these values successful and mainstream in Hungary. Don't worry, a Christian politician cannot be racist.
And went on to provide counsel on how best to achieve that vision of America.
In order to win, it is not enough to know what you are fighting for. You also have to know how you should fight. My answer is, play by your own rules.
But this week's reunion was not the beginning of the right's fascination with Orban. Before Republicans launched today's culture war in the U.S., Orban did it first and has been lauded by conservative media figures like Fox News host Tucker Carlson.
He believes countries need borders. For saying these things out loud, Orban has been vilified.
The bond between Republicans and Orban goes back years.
And Orban's election campaigns in 2010 and 2014 were run by American Republican Party electoral consultants.
Orban's white nationalist ideology has isolated him from other European Union leaders, and he's incurred sanctions from the European Union. He's adopted anti-immigration policies and has campaigned against the LGBTQ community.
We decided we don't need more genders, we need more rangers. Less drag queens and more Chuck Norris.
As of this year, Republicans control 30 state legislatures to Democrats 17. This midterm election cycle, many Republican candidates have spread lies that Trump won in 2020 and that American elections are rigged. And they're running for offices that directly oversee election laws.
It's very easy to sort of say, well, this is just a political disagreement. But actually, it's democracy dying right in front of us. It's through free and fair elections that bring to power a leader with autocratic tendencies, who then uses the power of the state and the power of lawmaking to undermine democratic institutions.
Last year, a global watchdog listed the United States as a backsliding democracy for the first time. This fall will be the first test of whether Orban's vision starts to become an American reality. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Laura Barone-Lopez.
The Danube Institute, established in 2013, is headquartered in Budapest, Hungary, and is one of the premier conservative think tanks of Europe. It bills itself as a center-right and is committed to a respectful conversation in cultural, religious, and social life. One particular area in which the Institute focuses is the Christian faith. This can be seen by the research group that puts a focus on the importance of Christian faith and democracy. This group believes the study of Christian principles, values, practices, and institutions can contribute to the rediscovery of Christian roots and provide a solid basis for the preservation of Christian political traditions. It also created a persecuted Christians research group, which helps Hungary become one of the first countries in the world to address the issue of persecuted Christians at a government level. Istvan Kiss is the executive director and has met with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development and the Department of Agriculture. Mr. Kiss was here and had the opportunity to speak on the Senate floor a couple of weeks ago. Hopefully, we can work together on issues that affects our citizens. It has been interesting to read about the Hungarian way of life. The way they believe that there's very little problems with issues like addiction, mental health, homelessness, crime, and welfare. In welfare, if you are able, then you work. I believe this stems from their belief in living by Christian faith. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
I'm deeply troubled by this resolution, Representative Hicks. This organization is tied to an autocrat in Hungary, Orban. Are you familiar with who that is?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I'm not.
Representative Jones.
So you're bringing a resolution for an organization tied to an authoritarian who you're not even familiar what this organization is. And so that just shows us that there's not been thought put into this. This is about fascism. This is an organization that has been allied with fascist governments. And I don't know if that's what this government wants to be. We see what we're doing here, expelling members for dissenting, but that's what was happening in Hungary. And so this is very disturbing, it's very troubling. It's perpetuating this false moral narrative of persecution. And it's also pushing this very anti-democratic, authoritarian, autocratic way of thinking. And I think that's counter to what we should stand for in this body. But I see that we're sliding in and we're trying to model ourselves off those very troubling forms of government. My question is, who asked you to bring this resolution?
Representative Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had a constituent in my district that has done the research and actually went to Hungary and presented the executive director and the director of this with the proclamation. And he was on the Senate floor not long ago. And that's why I'm in studying this. It was actually very interesting to find. You know, we live in a great state, okay? But a lot of the issues that we deal with in this state, especially of late, is not solved politically. It is really not. And that's what I took to this is their faith. They solve issues through spiritual growth in generations. And I think that's something that we can really grab a hold of in this state and in America and look at.
Representative Jones.
If you believe that to be true, Representative Hicks, perhaps it's time to switch professions, because we're here as a government body to promote the public good. If you want to go to theology school, I see some folks from Vanderbilt Divinity here who you can ask about how to apply.
Representative Jones, you're out of order. That's enough. We're moving on. No, sir, I'm not. You've been out of order. You're out of order. We're not doing this. Representative McCalman's next.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question's been called. Is there objection? We're on the board. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 71, 20 nays.
Previous question prevails. We're voting. All those in favor of Senate Joint Resolution 174, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 70, 20 nays, two present on voting.
Senate Joint Resolution 174, having a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. Most reconsider table.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is meeting with former President Donald Trump today after a visit to Washington yesterday, where he met with no one from the Biden. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is meeting with former President Donald Trump today after a visit to Washington yesterday, where he met with no one from the Biden administration. Orban delayed both European aid to Ukraine and Sweden's bid to join NATO. Nick Schifrin examines Orban's relationship with global conservatives and why he's resisted some of the Biden administration's top priorities in Europe.
From Turkey to Texas.
My country, Hungary, is the lone star state of Europe.
From Moscow to Mar-a-Lago. There's a great man, a great leader in Europe, Viktor Orban.
A gadfly to what he calls globalists.
There's no problem with so-called, Ukraine fatigue, for sure. We have Orban fatigue now.
Cherished by conservatives.
He thinks families are more important than banks. He believes countries need borders.
They hate me and slander me and my country as they hate you and slander you and the America you stand for. We don't have same-sex marriage and all that kind of things.
This week, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban visited Washington, D.C. to meet his American supporters. He spoke at the Heritage Foundation, but met no Biden administration officials. And today's meeting with former President Donald Trump comes 1 month after Orban effectively gave Trump his endorsement.
Egy Make America Great Again elnökségnek Amerikában.
More and more we've seen that the liberal international agenda has been pushed everywhere. So Hungary decided to push back.
Gladon Papin is the president of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, a research institution attached to the Prime Minister's office.
After President Trump lost in 2020, a lot of American conservatives, myself included at that time, were looking around to see what a successful form of conservative government looked like. Conservatives can't just stand in opposition. They have to offer something. They can't just be anti-government. They have to offer a vision of governing. That is available in Hungary. It's different and distinct.
Domestically, Orban's supporters say he and the governing Fidesz party support families and their version of family values, including defining marriage between a man and a woman. And they've achieved nearly full employment and offered citizens cheap energy by relying on Russia.
He is showing that a more conservative alternative in government is not only possible, but can be very successful.
But Orban's critics, who sometimes fill Budapest streets, accuse Orban of snuffing out free speech, silencing independent media, and neutering the judicial branch to create what Orban himself called an illiberal state based on national values.
Orban is actually modeling for the Republican Party in the U.S. how you can actually lead with culture wars and wind up with dictatorship.
Kim Lane Shepley is a Princeton professor who worked in Hungary's constitutional court in the 1990s and has studied Hungarian constitutional law ever since. She says Orban might be Europe's longest-serving head of government, but became so by changing the constitution and gerrymandering districts to ensure one-party control.
The last free and fair election in Hungary was in 2010. He's since rigged all the other elections. So he doesn't have the whole country behind him, but he will look like a great success because he wins elections overwhelmingly, which he does because he got to write all the rules.
Most recently, and most worrying for the U.S., Hungary resisted approving Sweden's bid to join NATO and European Union support for Ukraine. In each case, Orban got what he wanted. Swedish jets and 10 billion euros the EU had frozen over Hungary's violations of the rule of law.
Orban is trying to rattle the institutions on which America has really relied in Europe. The EU, NATO, also the Council of Europe, that whole network is really threatened when you have a dictatorship in the midst using this veto power to, transactionally change the policies of all those organizations.
Papin disagrees.
Well, I think he's trying to defend the interests of his own country.
And he says Europe is threatened by an ideological alternative.
I think there is a battle for the heart of the European Union and even for Western civilization itself. And I think sometimes the pressure that's put on Hungary is because it is within the West, it is within Europe, but it represents an alternative way, this more conservative approach, which is still very successful.
Orban provides a roadmap. His allies believe that road is and leads right.
Probably, like me, a little bit controversial, but that's okay.
His critics think the road falls off the cliff.
He has outsized influence among people who really have the aspiration to stay in power forever, who need to win elections and want to do it through whipping up culture wars. This is the recipe that can come to a country near you.
And whether any of that recipe is served up in the U.S. could hinge on the November election. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.